Hey everybody, welcome to Shooting the with Yankee. And as usual, I'm Yankee, so let's start shooting. Tonight's topic is one that divides a lot of people in the gun world. People have different opinions about this. It's striker fired versus hammer fired when it comes to pistols. Which one do you prefer? Which one do you think is better? I want to hear what your all's opinions are. As usual, I'll get the ball rolling with my opinion. I much prefer hammer fired guns. Even if it's in a semi-automatic format, I want that hammer. I'm not a big fan of the way striker fired systems work, whether they fully pull the spring back and the striker back and hold it with a sear, or whether they partially pull it back and then pull it the rest of the way when you pull the trigger. No matter which one of those systems it is, I just don't like it. I find it doesn't lend itself to a good trigger. It should be a very light trigger, but because of the way the mechanism works and the way it's always under constant spring tension from the sear being held back and the hammer and all this stuff, I've just never found them to be as good a trigger. I much prefer a hammer fired gun. Also, I believe, and I've seen evidence throughout my life, that hammer fire is just sturdier. It's a stronger system. You don't have to be concerned as much about the weight of the firing pin or any of these other things because, the hammer's doing most of the work, not the spring. So that's always a good thing to me. It's just a more solid, robust system. It's more reliable. And you get that option of double action or single action that you don't usually get with most striker fired guns. Now, there have been striker fired guns that gave you that option. The Walther, the P99 AS springs to mind. But generally, I just find striker fired guns to be, well, I'll say inferior in most ways to hammer fired guns. Now, it does give you the option of having a gun that is, has less things on the outside. I guess what you'd say. Some people worry about, hammers hooking on stuff. I don't worry about that. So in my opinion, hammers are just better than strikers all the way around, whether it's an internal hammer, an external hammer, whether it's on a revolver or a semi-auto. Give me hammer fired any day of the week. Now, let's see what you all think. See if you agree, disagree. Edgar Cortez said, I suspect hammer fired guns are better, but I own both types. Well, I own both types too. I have some striker fireds, but I would say, even if you look over here on my semi-automatic wall, what do you see more than anything else? Hammer, 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 striker, striker. Not a whole lot of strikers. There's a striker fired gun. There's a striker fired gun. Hammer fired gun. Hammer, hammer. That whole wall's hammer. These are revolvers, and they're all hammers, either internal or external. So I do own some striker fired guns. There's one laying in there right now. I'm doing a video on striker fired gun. But I lean towards the hammers. If you look through my collection, you'll see probably 10-1 hammer fired guns to striker. And that's because of my own personal preference and how I think they're better. Mike D, Sig hammer fired with real hammers. You mean like when they hold one up and bash it on the back end with a hammer? Like when they trying to show, look, watch how this gun fails. And then they beat it till they break the sear. Those are always really good. Dale Rickety says hammered fired guns are best. Strikers okay. That's kind of the way I feel about it. In some applications, striker fired guns get the job done, but they're in no way a better mechanism. I just don't think they're as good as a hammer fired gun, period. And it'd take a lot of evidence to convince me otherwise. John Heasley said hammer fired have way better triggers. Yes, I agree 100%. That's one of the reasons I like hammered better. And I also think it gives you better trigger options between double action and single action, way better than striker fired guns do, even with some of the ones that do that. Because in the ones that are striker fired, like in the AS, you decocked that spring and striker, and then when you pulled the trigger, it cocked to that spring and striker and then released it. Instead of holding it like 80% cocked and then taking it back 20 and letting it go when you pulled the trigger, if it was in regular mode, it put it forward to not in cocked like 10%, and then you had to move it back 90% to get it to fire. And I love that about it as a striker fired, but still wasn't as good as a revolver at doing that. Aaron Talks Firearms says, hammer fired. Striker fired guns always seem to have lousy triggers. Walther and H&K have good triggers, but they're nothing compared to a 1911. Well, when you're comparing a single action hammer to a striker, you would think that would actually be a fair comparison because strikers are generally held cocked and locked, basically, and you're removing a sear and letting them go. Some you have to move it back a little bit more, but not like a full cock of the hammer. So you think that'd be a fair comparison, that a striker fired should be as good as a 1911, but I just have never seen that. If someone wants to point out one that is, but I've never seen it. And that's, a single action trigger. And you'd think, like I said, striker would lend itself to that, but it doesn't seem to. And that's one thing I like about H&K and stuff he mentioned, that they got hammer options on them. Flash in the Pan said, hammer fired offers a more customizable trigger. Yes, it does. You get more of an option. And some people think that all hammer fireds are double action, single action, or single action only, but they're actually, or double action only, but there are single action hammer fired guns. Take the FN57. That's basically a single action hammer fired gun. It's, or light double action, some people call them. Like, look at the cars, etc. Not the cars, sorry. What was I saying? The FN. Look at the FN57. It's got a hammer. It pre-cocks that hammer. And when you're pulling that trigger, you're just releasing the sear to release the hammer. The hammer strikes the firearm. And also while you're pulling the trigger, you depress the plunger safety, the firing pin block, and just the hammer hits the firing pin. So you could have them light single action with a hammer too. A lot of people don't really feel those or experience those very often because they're more rare, but they exist. Adam Jacobies said, I prefer hammer fire due to better trigger feel. I do too. Hammer triggers are crisper versus the spongy feel of most striker triggers. Long live the Beretta 9296. I don't know why I gave him that accent, but I agree 100%. Once again, someone else agreeing with me. And I think one of the reasons that a lot of striker fired triggers are so bad is because of the way the mechanism's set up. The resistance against the trigger is mostly being provided by other springs and stuff, other than like a hammer strut or a hammer spring. So it tends to be creepy springs. And even on the ones where, like a Glock, where it's in like 70% position or something like that, and you 80 and you put it back another 20 or so, the spring on the firing pin is not a very robust spring. So you feel that crunchy creepiness, and it just makes the trigger bad as far as I'm concerned. John Baloney Jr. says, I prefer to EDC hammer fired HKs, but both my woods carry 10 millimeters. Pistols are striker fired. Both my woods carry 10 millimeter pistols are striker fired. FN510 tactical and Springfield XDM Elite compact. Well, I mean, mix them up, have fun. But yeah, I still agree that, striker fireds can be good. I have a striker fired 10 millimeter in my car, my Glock 20, and I trust my life to that gun. And if I was ever in a bad situation and I needed something a little more than what I carry, that's the gun that I would be dependent on, that and the rifle in my trunk. So I obviously think striker fired can do the job. I just don't think they're as good. Paul B said, it is a fact that I prefer hammer fired. Well, it's a fact that that's your opinion. Yes, that's the perfect way to present that. That's because of what we were talking about before we started recording here. For a while, I always come in. We always talk like 5 or 6 minutes before we start recording, in case you don't know, those of you out there. Then we talk a little while between this one and the next thing we film. That's when we get into the juicy stuff that we don't want everybody hearing. And it's also so that, I don't leave those things live, so YouTube don't give me strikes over the juicy stuff. Johnny Mandrick said, if we are talking carry, I say hammer fired is safer. It is safer. I didn't even get into the safety aspect of it, but I agree. Especially with decocker. For triggers, I find single action is much better pull. Yeah, well, yeah, single action is always going to be better. Even on a revolver, cocking it, single action is that you're going to hit your target with single action. As long as you don't have an aversion to recoil or muzzle blast, if you can point, you can hit your target with a single action gun because you're not going to jerk the trigger. You're not going to put too much pressure to one side. You're not going to do any of that with a single action trigger. So as long as you do not have an aversion to muzzle blast and recoil, you will hit your target with a single action hammer fired trigger. Practical bacon. I don't really have a preference. I just want a good, smooth trigger pull. So hammer fired. So you prefer hammer fired. I've used good and bad of both types. John of all trades, haven't seen him in a while. So I think you might be neglecting striker fired bolt action rifles, 2 world wars. Well, rifles and pistols are completely different. And they have a completely different type of effect on how you shoot. But yeah, there are some. And a lot of the rifles some people think are striker fired are actually more of a form of internal hammer than anything else. But yeah, you got your semi-automatic rifles here with your bolts and your firing pins and stuff. But they're 2 totally different things, really. A striker fired revolver, even though they share very similar principles, they're completely different because of how you hold a rifle, even to where it doesn't matter. And you can make it lighter and you can make it better, but because you got more real estate inside, etc. But it's just different. Chunky D, what about internal hammered guns? Yes or no? I don't mind an internal hammer. I have nothing wrong with one. Whether you're talking about double action only revolvers, it's not my preference. I prefer an external hammer, but they're a good mechanism. They're a solid mechanism. They have good feel. They're smooth. They're clean. So I really like a double action only revolver as far as its trigger and its performance. Prefer external, so I have the single action option. And like I said, there are guns that are semi-automatic and have internal hammers. Like I said, the FN57 is one of them that comes to mind right away. And it comes to mind because it's right there. That's why it comes to mind. So, and then there's guns that have like the hammer kind of hidden, that kind of do a little, like you ever see the little Boberg or the Bond Arms bullpups got that little flappy hammer that looks like a back plate. I can't show it to you because I'm getting strike. But Mr. Furley said striker fired for the consistency in trigger pull. Well, yeah, you'll get more consistency. Well, I don't know if it'll be more consistent. It'll be more consistently the thing you're wanting. That quick reset, short reset. You can get that from a striker fired. You're not going to get that unless it's, a single action only hammer fired gun. You can get that from that too, just like you can, like the FN57. But you're not going to find that as much with hammers. You're going to find that more with strikers. So if on a scale of 1 to 10, you'd rather have a 4 constantly rather than a 7, 9, option, well then, yeah, striker's going to fill your needs more often than hammer. Mark Calkins, I prefer hammer fired guns except for cars. I like the striker fired guns to feel like I'm not part of the process of the weapons operation. Cars have the best striker fired gun on the market as far as trigger pull. I've always said amazing trigger pull, always loved them. I've owned multiple cars throughout my life. I currently don't have one right now, but because I always sell them whenever I need to buy something else. But yeah, so I love the cars. I'll say that. Oh, Donnie Dickerson says, I feel safer with hammer fired, especially when reholstering, and I can ride with my thumb in case of a trigger snag. That's another advantage to hammers. That gets more into the safety thing like you and Rickety are talking about. And then we got one last person chiming in here, and they said bacon or lasagna. Well, they're both awesome, but 90% of the time someone offers me bacon or lasagna, we'll go bacon because you can't mess up bacon. Now, if it's lasagna I've made or bacon, I'll take the lasagna I made because I love lasagna. But if you're out somewhere, like if you're at a restaurant, I'm more prone to order bacon and just tell them how I want it. I don't want it crispy. And then it's hard to mess it up. But if you order lasagna in a restaurant, you don't know what you're going to get. You could be getting anything from a brick of styrofoam to some sort of Italian soup. So yeah, I'm going to go with bacon for consistency. Kind of like how some people went with striker fired over hammer for consistency. Same thing with bacon. But that looks like that's it today. Everybody weighed in, and we got a lot of people weighing in today. I didn't expect that much response to this topic. But I want to thank everybody who did weigh in. Love hearing your all's opinions, whether they're the same as mine or not. And I do think some people probably I think maybe my audience leans towards stuff I like too. That's why they're my audience. That's why I always want other people to come in, be heard, maybe differing opinions. So if you're someone who'd like to weigh in on one of these topics, come to one of our live chats. We have them every night at 6 p.m., except for Wednesdays when they're at 7 p.m. For now, that might change now that Never Enough Ammo has moved up to the Great White North, the tundra. He's changing his time schedules now, so we might have to. He's up there right now trying to survive, trying to keep from freezing his ass off as a Texan in the Great White North. So we will see if he lives or not to even do his chats, or gets eaten by a polar bear or something. Do they have polar bears in Michigan? They should. But we might be changing our schedule. But like I said, every night at 6 p.m., except for Wednesdays when they're at 7 p.m. Come on in, have your opinion heard. Hope to see you at one of our live chats soon. Until then, thanks to everybody who participated. And always remember, always carry and stay safe until I see you again.